So, Jennifer, thanks for agreeing to come on my podcast.
It's nice to finally meet you.
Oh, goodness. Okay, so for those of you that aren't familiar with my partner, Jennifer Brom, she is Jennifer Brom.
Certainly. So for the past few years, I have been working for a nonprofit agency here in Lane County called Sexual Assault Support Services. We are the standalone sexual assault advocacy agency for Lane County. And my job, aside from being an advocate who answers the crisis line and responds to hospital advocacy in the emergency department, is also overseeing direct service and volunteers and training for survivors of both more recent sexual assault experiences as well as past assaults. We are also available for partners, friends, and family of folks who have experienced sexual assault. We respond to folks who are in acute crisis, both over the phone and in person, as well as folks who are processing traumas from their past.
Gotcha. Okay. So what I wanted to do today, and to take the opportunity to go over something that you've shared with me a fair amount about, technically called supportive communication. And
yeah, supportive communication is one of the methods that SAS uses through our trauma-informed care model. And it is, I would say, one of the more challenging methods to learn for our volunteers, because it's not innately how individuals would communicate with someone. Kind of goes against our what we've been taught to communicate. So on the surface, it seems like a fairly simple method, but it can be a challenge to learn, because innately we want to help, but also
Right.
we want to be we also want to be heard.
Right.
We also want to be validated. We also want to be understood. So supportive communication is about getting out of the way so that you can allow someone else the space to be. At SAS, we are survivor-centered and trauma-informed. And what that means is that we believe folks have the ability within themselves to know what's best for them. And so part of being survivor-centered is knowing how to let them guide the ship themselves to find their own path to healing. And we are there to support them. We're there to provide resources. And one of the ways that we do that is through supportive communication. And what supportive communication does is listens to understand versus listening to respond. And often, if you're in a conversation, you recognize, if you start to pay attention to your own thoughts, that you are coming up with your response and planning your rebuttal or what have you before the person's even done saying what they're going to say. We all do it. And so the first step is recognizing that that's what you're doing and to put that aside.
It's not uncommon for me to sort of hitch my wagon to a thought and plan my response to that one comment, even if the person makes 2 or 3 or 4 or more points or comments along the way. I'm still thinking about that first thing that I was going to say, which would sort of derail the conversation or go backward.
Yeah, and what happens is you've heard 1/4 of what they said.
Right.
And how do we provide supportive communication? First off, you need to listen. Like we said, if you're thinking about your response, you're not listening anymore. So you have to stop what you're doing, kind of clear your mind, and concentrate on the person in front of you. Concentrate on what they're saying. Give them your undivided attention. Secondly is validating their experience, so that they do feel heard and understood. Often when someone is having a difficult experience and it's not something they've been comfortable sharing, just having someone else believe them and validate their experience can really help solidify what they're going through.
Right.
So the components of supportive communication are the same components that would make up any communication. First and foremost is body language. I forget what the percentage is, 70 to 90% of what we communicate to folks is actually through body language. So if you're speaking and listening and having a conversation with someone in the real, making sure that you hold yourself in a way that's not intimidating. It can be helpful to sit at an angle from someone instead of directly in front of them, which can seem kind of confrontational. And then, little things like, don't keep looking at your watch or, your phone to check the time.
Yeah.
Obviously, don't be, text messaging other people or checking your emails. So just showing that physically you're there and that you are not posing a threat. Often sort of mirroring or emulating what they're doing. If they're not comfortable looking you in the eye, then, if they're doing side glances, then that is also what you can do. If they seem to be a person that wants to look you in the eye, just mirroring that because that's clearly what they're wanting from the conversation. And then within the conversation, remembering what they've said. So coming back to something, if someone was talking about their childhood and they had said they lived off River Road, later in the conversation, it could be like, right, oh yeah, the house off River Road, right? You're remembering so that they feel like you've truly engaged, that you're taking in the information, that you're retaining it. Asking clarifying questions. It shows that you're interested in what they have to say and that you truly want to understand what they're saying. So clarifying what they have told you shows that you have a true interest in understanding what they've said. So you can ask clarifying questions like, was that, let me see if I understand the timeline correctly, was that before or after XYZ? So that they know you're truly invested in understanding what they have to say. And then listening for their feelings. And it's very helpful for folks to have more words for their feelings. So if someone is sounding very upset, you can say, it sounds like this really upset you, or this seems like a very frustrating experience for you. And I wouldn't put like a lot of value judgment. I wouldn't say this sounds like it was really terrible or, that's an awful thing that you went through, but more of just reflecting the feelings that you're hearing from them. Or, reflecting back the same words that they've used. If they said, I was really frightened when this happened, and it says, yeah, it sounds like you were very frightened. So validating their feelings is a really important step to having someone feel like they're understood. It can be helpful to have reflection and summarize what they've said to you. By summarizing, you can sort of show that you've listened to all of the components. And it can be really helpful, if someone is very upset, they feel very fragmented. And so once you've sort of concentrated what's happened to them and put it in this nice little concise package, they can really feel like, yeah, that's what's happened to me. Yes. And they feel understood and they feel like they've got a little more clarity about the state of things. And it's important in a conversation to have, we call it minimal encouragers or utterances. And there's a fine balance to that, and it can take some practice. But like you've already been doing now as we're speaking, just letting someone know in very minimal ways that you hear them. And you can vary it, and you can say, right, oh,
Wow.
no, not that.
Not that. Not wow.
And just very minimal. It doesn't side rail the conversation. It just supports the conversation. It's not adding too much, but they do genuinely feel like you're still interested, you're still engaged, you still understand. So there's a fine balance, and I think it can take some practice to feel comfortable doing that, because it can feel a little odd to just keep making little noises. I think one of the coolest things to see when I'm training someone new is the confidence that this type of communication is helpful, and that comes from experience. It comes from seeing the progress and seeing the natural flow of a conversation when you employ this method. I think for me, it became easier and easier to use supportive communication the more I saw how effective it was. So having a conversation with someone and really wanting to get in there and respond and say something, and you're like, oh, like I have the answer to this, or I have an experience that's so similar, or like I just want to tell them what to do because it'll make it all better.
Right.
But if you hold back, one instructor had said, you do that 3 times in the beginning, like you have that urge to say something, hold back. Second urge, like I really gotta do it, and you hold back again. And the third time you hold it, and then the individual you're talking to will have continued the conversation in the way that was right for them.
Right.
And so often people will come to their own conclusions. They will find the solace or the comfort that they were seeking just through following their own path of thought. And so the more that you see that work, the easier it is for you to just not say anything. It's like, here we go. Like,
right.
I'm going to let you process this. And I have confidence that if you were meant to come to your conclusion today and get what you needed from this conversation, you're going to find it. And I don't need to twist your arm to get there. And any answers that I may think I have for you, they're not going to land if it's not what you're meant to receive. And what you need is within you. And so it's not for me to give.
It reminds me of the give some folks a fish or teach some folks to fish. Any lessons that we personally have for ourselves are super interesting and relevant to our story, but those same lessons won't have the same impact for anyone else. And until they learn themselves to manage that lesson through their own framework of experience and processing, it won't affect a lasting change.
Right. Yeah. They are developing the power of autonomy, and no one else can do that for you.
Right.
It's definitely important to have a safe space to do that and a supportive space to do that. And what safe and supportive means is a place where they're allowed to follow their own path.
Absolutely. It's all well and good that we think about supportive communication, but it's probably pretty easy to get derailed when it comes to actually putting these things into practice in real life. You know, these people you have relationships with, they're your friends, they're your family, they're your kids, they're the person that you don't like for whatever reason. You know, what are some sort of typical challenges you might run into when trying to practice supportive communication?
Good question.
Thanks.
You certainly will run into a roadblock if you start to ask why. If you start asking someone why, then you are dictating the direction, the next turn in the conversation, and that may not be where they want to go. And generally, it's good to ask yourself before asking why. Am I asking this question because it's something I need to know, or is it because I want to know? And, you know, and we want to know. We are curious. If we're genuinely listening and engaging and invested in this conversation, we're going to have questions. And so it can be hard to just kind of hold your tongue. But it's always good to ask yourself, why? Why do I need to know this? Do I need to know this? If I don't, let it go, right? And then telling people what you think they should do. Well, you should go see a doctor about that, right?
Right.
Did they ask you for your opinion?
Right.
Did they ask you for your advice? Or are they just, you know, processing what's going on? And you're probably speaking from your own experience. And maybe it's what you should do, but quite possibly not what they should do. Yeah, so, and it may not be what they should do.
Right.
And you should leave those types of comments to professionals if they haven't come to you in a professional fashion and just as a support person.
Well, you know, if somebody has chopped off their pinky finger, they probably know they need to go to the doctor. You telling them to do so is not new information.
Right.
Or,
they should put the pinky on ice.
Yeah.
But that's only if they want to keep the pinky,
It's
right?
true.
So there's ways you could say, if you want them to be able to reattach that pinky, you should put it on ice.
Right. That makes sense. Giving them the opportunity to choose.
Yeah, so there's ways that you can provide options without providing direction and demands.
Right.
If this is a particular outcome you're looking for, some people have found doing this to be useful.
Right. And that takes you out of the situation as well.
Absolutely.
Right.
And it still just provides them with options. They're still in charge. They can decide to dismiss that if they want to. And it's important not to put value on their statements that they're not putting on themselves. Often when someone's gone through a terrible experience, we tell them that they're so strong and so brave for being able to survive that. But maybe that person doesn't want to feel strong or brave in that moment. It's okay to be weak sometimes. And also they may feel like you're trying to put a positive spin on a negative thing that happened to them.
Sure.
If a person is putting that positive spin on it themselves, if they are recognizing that process for themselves, then you can, basically you're reflecting and validating that they feel that way, but you're not putting the value on that experience for them. They're doing it themselves. Sometimes it can have a negative effect when people are told that they're strong or brave, because if they don't feel that way, then they feel there's something wrong with them.
Right.
So they walk away feeling broken. They're like, I don't feel strong or brave. I feel weak. I feel vulnerable. There must be something wrong with me. And it's important not to, like I said, put a positive spin on things like adding value to their statements, but also it's important to avoid making comparisons or, saying, well, at least this didn't happen,
Right.
or, could have been worse,
Right.
or there's people who have had, more difficult experiences than you, so at least you're not those people. It's not about comparing this experience
Right.
or rating it.
Right.
It's and that would be us trying to make ourselves feel better by trying to make them feel better,
Right.
by making things seem better. And in reality, what they need is just the space to be and feel and process where they are at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, that sort of speaks to sitting with our negative emotions as they come up. And one of those negative emotions that comes up when you interact with people is that sense of embarrassment or guilt or shame. And your responsibility in that moment is to not draw comparison because it takes away from their experience.
Right. Yeah. It's not about me. It's not about how I can relate. One of the challenging things about supportive communication and holding space for someone is that you do take in some of that negative energy.
For sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And so how do you maintain and sustain and thrive as someone who's taking in that energy? And
well, this can be particularly difficult if that's somebody that you see on a regular basis that you're trying to practice supportive communication with, or if it's your job, for example.
Yeah, and if you want to be able to continue to be that person for people, you have to learn a boundary within yourself, sort of like an emotional boundary. And I think it's different for everyone, and I think it takes practice to figure out where that is and what that looks like. But holding space for someone, taking in their story, sort of absorbing and digesting their trauma, and then being able to walk away from it and not taking it with you and keeping it yourself, because you can't continue to be there for people if you're taking on everybody's trauma as well.
Yeah.
So I think it just takes practice, observing within yourself and recognizing that their situation is not your situation. You are not jumping in the water with them, you're throwing them a life preserver. And so developing healthy emotional boundaries is fundamental for your own mental well-being.